So from the more global standpoint, jumping into the manufacturing side of things, because we touched on this a little bit earlier, but in the United States and in much of the developed world, we see an extensive amount of outsourcing of lower level manufacturing processing, which still contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And if I'm wrong, just feel free to correct me. But from the systems thinking standpoint, this seems to be more of a form of local optimization instead of a global optimization. And so it seems to me like we're moving kind of the problem to another area in the world, which may look good on paper for us, but not necessarily for the overarching issue. So do you think that observation is correct? And, if so, can material science be used to develop globally sustainable solutions instead of just local optimization?
Right. So many people who's producing a biofuel today will get certified through different kind of sustainability certification bodies. One is ISCC that we have, as well as RSB is another one, Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials. So when you do those certifications, you go through every single step of your production process, wherever it is in the world. So there are people who are producing sustainable palm oil in Indonesia, and they have to check that every single one of those palm plantations did not come up from someone burning a bunch of peatland to produce palm trees, because that's awful for the environment. But they're actually going through and checking it, even though that palm oil is then being moved to a facility where it's just cracked to make renewable diesel. They still have to go all the way back to Indonesia to see where they got it, how it was made. So there are ways to fully track that. Another part of that is kind of blockchain and being able to trace exactly where something came from. And because it's immutable, you can't fraud it. You can't say that you had magically 2 tons of used cooking oil that came from the Wendy's down the street that also seems to be the same cooking oil that came from this burned peatland in Indonesia.
Seems sketchy.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of incentive for fraud, and especially like used cooking oil systems. So there are ways to track that accurately and immutably so that people can't do those sketchy practices. So I would say that there are sustainable ways to do agriculture and such, any feedstock production really, that can be done anywhere in the world, and any fuel producer should be tracking what that is. And as we move forward with more and more demand for biofuels and whatever else, that's going to be, more people are going to ask where it came from, and they're going to want to see exactly how it got there, which will help make sure that those are actually produced sustainably and ethically and all of those points.
So a quick follow-up to that. So we hear the term blockchain a lot thrown around in sort of the computer science sphere of things. But in terms of what you're proposing here with blockchain sort of as a means or paradigm to verify the sustainability of practices to produce kind of anything, what are you getting to there? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so our system is called Verity Tracking. So it is a blockchain system. And the purpose of what we're doing is that if I say that our farmer is doing no-till corn production, I can prove that my farmer is doing no-till corn production because I can track all the way back from the fuel going to a wing of a plane to the actual farmer. I can show you Sean, his farm, and I can show you his strip till planter. I can literally show you that piece of paper all the way to the wing of the plane where the fuel is being onboarded. So without blockchain, that's really hard to track logistically exactly how that fuel got there, how the corn was produced, what year that corn was produced, what actually was on field for that corn. So like nitrogen usage, water, all of that stuff. Blockchain is just enabling the ability to track those systems in a way that's so detailed that you can see pretty much whatever you wanted to know about the fuel, its production, where it went, how it got there, all of the information, which is, in the end of the day, that is what your sustainable claim is. It's how it got there, how it was made, who touched it, that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's just really enabling tracking, which is all blockchain has been used for financial markets too. It's just making sure that whatever you're saying is happening is actually happening, and having a record of it that's immutable. You can't fraud it. It is what it is.
Yeah, so fundamentally, it's that same concept of verification. And the way you're describing it, it certainly sounds like that's a key component in terms of doing this calculus for this life cycle analysis to determine either that, carbon neutrality or ideally that carbon negative outcome. So yeah, it's not something I'd heard of in this space. So that's awesome.
So your Gevo's tracking software in that process seems very extensive. Is that mandatory, or is that required for all companies, all manufacturers?
No, by no means is it not required. However, there has been a good amount of fraud that has happened historically, especially in the renewable diesel market, that's made this seem worth it to us and for us to be willing to set a higher bar for these markets. If you're going to claim something sustainable and something's better for the environment, you need to be able to back that claim.
So I guess outside of the sustainable companies, it seems like it would be a good idea if that tracking software was implemented for, steel manufacturers, just to see exactly what processes cause the most emissions. Do you see that being something that the government starts to require for, companies worldwide or nationwide? It seems like a good way to create data-driven solutions.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that yes, that I think where the world is going, there's more and more emphasis being made on ESG for stocks and such. So that environmental social governance pieces and how investors are actually putting their money in places, which means there's incentive for people to be able to back those metrics. And at the end of the day, those are just metrics, but someone has to verify it somewhere. And it can be done pretty simply with blockchain. The same thing if you're saying that you're putting money towards a carbon offset somewhere, how do you really know that that's going to a carbon offset that you thought it was going to, not someone's paycheck, Right. If you want to be able to know that you actually made a change, not that they just told you they made a change, that can be anything.
So to talk a little bit more about this whole paradigm shift, we're all engineers here, and Puneeth and I are both finishing up school, and in both our classes and in our jobs, we're encouraged a lot to think about, the cost of materials, the properties of materials, and the ease of manufacturing. But really, there seems to be the emphasis, I feel like it's somewhat shifted recently, but it tends to be seldom on the potential impact of materials and sourcing this whole thing on the environment. So do you have any thoughts on how material sustainability can be better emphasized in the classroom and as well as the workplace, and how to better create that emphasis throughout the whole education cycle?
I think it can definitely be spoken to a lot more. I know back when I was in college, it really wasn't talked about at all. It's really just driving that change for people to think about why you're manufacturing something, why you wanted to do that thing, and what you want to leave behind when you're doing that thing. So if you're going to absolutely destroy the environment to make, something that's supposed to be helpful to the environment, that's not, obviously your overall picture is not helpful. So I think one of the major things that will start to come up is investors are starting to look a lot more at this. So they're not going to be willing to get onto projects that look like they are not actually fully beneficial to the environment and socially and all of those things. But it does start with people starting to ask those questions and saying, is this helpful or is this not helpful? What are the different repercussions that can happen when you start producing something this way? Or even if you decide that you want to have a manufacturing plant in a specific area of the world that already has whatever it is, if high corruption rates, high poverty rates, food security issues, you then need to be willing to address those issues when you're going through the planning and designing of whatever that process is. And I think it will start to come up more and more as people realize that this is necessary to be able to continue to build all of these things and actually continue to live in the world. But it just really starts with people being willing to ask those kind of hard questions sometimes.
I almost feel like there should be a required class for, sustainability, especially in these engineering majors. I don't think it was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but I don't think there was any sustainability classes. But I feel like if we're talking about the stuff that you're talking about, then that would really open up all our minds about exactly what we're doing and how it affects the environment.
Yeah, I think that would be really beneficial to be really pushing sustainability. I know we had like ethics classes, but I think you can really push the same way with sustainability. If you're making ethical decisions, those are